Happy Human Trafficking Awareness Day. Hey, Bekah.
Hi. Let me see if I can get my headphone to stay in actually while I'm on this call. We'll see. Hi, everyone.
All good. I feel like I've achieved something just when I can get on these these lives. I'm like, done.
Right.
How are you?
Totally not working. I'm just going to take it out. Good. Excited about today. Have my Power to the Survivors t-shirt on.
Oh, I love it. Let me see.
Yeah. Yes. You can't see my sweats.
Love it. Love it. No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, for everyone who's joining who doesn't know, January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And today is actually Human Trafficking Awareness Day. And we are kind of talking about demand a little bit this month. And last week got to talk to John Foley and hear his story on his side of being a former sex buyer. And I thought there was no one better to talk to today on Human Trafficking Awareness Day than you, Rebecca. And Becca and I have known each other. We've known each other for several years. She's got the coolest long resume that I won't read all the way through, but just recognized across the nation as a survivor leader and what she's done in this movement, and so well respected, just having run an organization for a while. And I can't even talk about all you've done. You have two degrees in, I think, criminal justice and criminology, and you're currently suing the state of Nevada for kind of their legalizing prostitution and such. And so I really want people to hear about that too. And recently received a presidential pardon. And so, wow. All the things. I would love, okay, before we jump into demands, will you give us tell everyone about kind of why you're suing the state of Nevada, because that's cool.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's been going on for a couple years now, and I was actually trafficked through the legal system of prostitution in Nevada, which is in brothels. So in the state of Nevada, it's the only place we have legalized prostitution in America. And every county with less than 750,000 people is allowed to pick whether they want legal prostitution or not. So of all the counties in Nevada, only 7 have chosen that, yes, we want to have brothels. And those 7 counties do not include Las Vegas. And so really the basis of it is because of the legal market, it only increases the demand and therefore increases the illegal market, which we all know Las Vegas is a huge hotspot. The state of Nevada is 63% higher than the next highest state for cases of human trafficking. And so it's created this environment of what happens here stays here. And you can't walk down Las Vegas Boulevard, 2 feet without being almost assaulted, with cards with, half dressed women being advertised to come to your room. And so we really believe that if we can shut down and change the state's laws and in those legal brothels, that we can reduce the demand for trafficking. And like I mentioned, I was actually trafficked through the legal brothels. I think a lot of people misunderstand and think that legalizing it will make it safer and healthier. And I can attest personally, it doesn't make it safer. It doesn't make it healthier. I was still trafficked. It doesn't matter if they run your fingerprints. It's not like you're going to automatically, it's going to show human trafficking victim when your fingerprints are ran. That's ridiculous. And so, I just came to a point, Lindsay, that it was just like, you know what? Why not? We've got to change these laws in this country. We've got to change people's perception. These legal pimps do things in their counties like buy all the town's police cars, or Lance Gilman he called it Hunt a Hoe Party, and he would send all the girls into the desert and arm the customers, right? The tricks, as we would call them, with paintball guns, and they would shoot whoever they could shoot. They got to get whatever sexual service they wanted. And so, when you have, right, this when women's bodies become commodities, in that way, the state has really become a pimp by proxy. And so that's why we're suing the state.
That's a good way to say that. That's a good way to say that. For people who don't, like, what's the easiest way you can help them in a one-on-one standpoint understand kind of what you just said, but like the difference between legalization, and there's a lot of people, just for people who don't know, there's a lot of people pushing for legalizing prostitution, and then there's those of us on the other side, and then there's somewhere in the middle. Can you give everyone a one-on-one on, if you're in the anti-trafficking movement, what you should know about that?
Yeah, so really, let's take like a 10,000-foot view, and there's kind of really three models out there. One would be criminalization, which is what most states have now, where we're arresting the victims. Sometimes we're arresting the Johns, the customers buying. We are trying to go after the traffickers and brothel owners as well. So basically, all parties are criminalized. What happens most often in that model is the victims get criminalized. The victims are, the ones on street corners, the ones on internet ads. They're the low-hanging fruit, and that's typically what law enforcement goes after. And so then we have, on the opposite end, we would have full decriminalization or legalization. And that would mean that no party is going to be arrested for prostitution, which, as I just demonstrated with Nevada, what happens when you have a legal market. I think I saw a report of how many millions of men go to Germany, right, to Amsterdam each year to buy sex there. And people, you just have to understand there will never be enough willing women to supply the demand, right? I work with law enforcement a lot nowadays, and you could put an ad on the internet for a decoy ad, and within a couple hours, you have hundreds of calls, right? Depending on, if you're in a major city. And so the demand far outweighs the supply. And that's why traffickers exploit young women and girls and boys to meet that demand. And so the legal market only increases that demand. And then we have somewhere in the middle, which is what partial decrim, but to not be confusing, we like to call it the equality model. It's also called the Nordic model. Sweden implemented it back in 99 or 2000. And it's where we decriminalize the people being sold in prostitution, but we criminalize the buyers, right, that are causing that demand, that are causing this issue, right, that are by their insatiable thirst for sex, they are forcing young women and girls into prostitution. Even if they aren't there, they're not the ones forcing it, but them constantly wanting to buy sex. And so we would go after the demand. We would also go after the pimps and brothel owners as well. We would continue to go after them, but we would remove that barrier, because one of the hardest things, Lindsay, in getting out, whether you're there by force or circumstance, is once you start racking up a criminal record for solicitation, trespassing, prostitution, whatever the charge may be, that becomes a huge red scarlet letter, on your chest. And it's such a barrier to ever getting out. I can tell you, as a survivor leader, I've walked away from jobs. I decided not to go to law school because I got my master's instead, because you know what? I think it's one thing as a survivor when you get to share your story because you want to, out of a position of strength, and you're helping other people. But it's an entirely different, shameful experience when you do it to someone in an HR department, or in an apartment office, when you're trying to rent an apartment and you have to explain, and you have to hope that they understand and they won't hold it against you. That's a very shameful experience. And so even just one prostitution charge can alter the rest of your life.
And so what you're saying is, I guess, like, it's not this simple, but for people who are just learning, maybe, we've got this trafficker or pimp, we've got the victim, and we have the buyer, the sex buyer. And what the equality model says is criminalize the trafficker and the buyer, but don't criminalize the victim or the provider in those situations. And so I think that's helpful. I mean, for people who say they care about this issue, I think there's so much messaging around the legalization of prostitution that goes around. And if you're not careful and you're not informed, you can be like, yeah, that sounds right. Because some of the message is a little bit deceiving in how it's portrayed. And so that's helpful. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say it's frustrating that a lot of people make the argument about women's agency and autonomy over their own bodies, when it's not. That's not what it's about. It's about the power and control of men over women's bodies. And as we see more and more amazing, strong women find their voices, the Me Too movement, right? People coming out now about sexual harassment. I mean, we have to stop viewing women as less than, and that they're property and that they can be bought and sold.
Yeah. It's basic right.
Yeah.
It's a basic dignity principle. So you were saying, about, I think this fits in. I want to hear a little bit about your presidential pardon, because people, exactly what you just explained on why there should be an equality model and why victims shouldn't be arrested and charged is essentially, and your journey on getting, like not being able to get an apartment or all these things because of your record has now changed. And so will you tell us just a little bit on how that came about and what it actually means?
Honestly, it was a really hard process, you guys. A presidential pardon is not made for victims. It is not a victim-centered process. It's very much a process of someone that is truly guilty of a crime, and you have to admit what you did, say you were wrong, and ask for forgiveness. And that's really hard. As a victim, I had some amazing pro bono attorneys, Kate Mogilescu, Jessica Emerson. They connected me with Lee Goodmark, and she was the one who walked with me for years working on this pardon application. And it was hard enough applying the first time, but every year or so, they would look at my application and they would send me another round of 2 pages full of questions, which would be things like, what was the last drug you used and how much did you use? Or, when's the last time you sold sex for money? Like, get out of here. Are you kidding me? Like, I've been in the field, right? I'm running an organization. Like, why do I keep getting these questions? And yeah, so it really came as a shock. I found out the day before Christmas Eve, and I was actually at a work party, and I found out by CBS calling me, and then someone from the White House calling me, which is crazy. Like, I can't believe where my life is today. I never thought that I would be where I am or even done half of what I've been able to do. And so, it is nice. It's great. But to be honest, Lindsay, it's just partial relief. I mean, it still shows up on my record. I still have to explain to people, but I get to say, I got this presidential pardon though. So it does make it look better. But what I've been advocating for the last few years as well is the Trafficking Survivor Relief Act. There's a new iteration. So it's the Trafficking Survivor Relief Act of 2020. And Senator Kristen Gillibrand and Senator Rob Portman both have bipartisan support on the bill. And what that bill would do is provide federal vacatur relief for victims like myself that incurred federal felonies while we were being trafficked. Because it's not just me, there's others as well. And so that would be the full relief. That would be like it never happened. So, this is a big step, but the fight continues.
Yeah, man, that's still pretty cool, though. So cool.
Yeah.
It is a big step. So vacatur is the word that explains kind of when it's full, when it could technically, you could buy a house or be screened and it not show up.
Yes. And so if those that want to know more about vacatur laws, polarisproject.org, they commissioned a report by the women that I mentioned, Kate Mogilescu and Jessica Emerson. I want to say it was released in 2019. It's on their website. It's a state-by-state report card, just stacking up vacatur laws, who's doing what, who's doing well, and they actually give a grade similar to Shared Hope's report. So
that's awesome. Wow. So let's talk about demand. I would love to hear your perspective, or, for others to hear kind of your perspective on, last week we heard from John Pulley and him getting arrested here in Dallas 20 years ago, and just the journey he's been on, the honest, vulnerable journey. And now we come to the other side of hearing a story, from your perspective. And so I know we're all kind of in differing pieces of understanding of all of this, but maybe by sharing a little bit of your story, helping people understand what do we mean when we say demand, sex buying. They're not like purchasing a child and taking them away somewhere. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so, I mean, sex buyers are prolific. They come across, when you look at research that's been done by Demand Abolition, it's no age, race, ethnicity, gender, no social status. There are men, seeking sexual services for $10, $20 on the street. And then there's also the, Jeffrey Epsteins and Robert Crafts that, are paying thousands of dollars, for a sexual encounter. And so, there's a really, really broad spectrum. While I was being trafficked, the demand, the customers, once they pay you for your body, you cease to become a human to them. I can't tell you how many grown men I've been in fistfights with, Lindsay. I mean, guys getting upset and wanting to fight you and take their money back because maybe they went too quickly, right? They thought it was going to last a lot longer. And then they want to fight you or call hotel security on you and get you arrested. And, honestly, it was terrible. I found guns in hotel rooms. How many women I know that have been murdered by customers. When you look at, especially at serial murderers, how many have gone after prostituted women because nobody cares, right? Nobody's going to look for them. Same with homeless people. Those are the top two populations, people that are murdered specifically by serial murderers. So, you just never know what you're walking into. You become as a prostituted person, you become a shrewd judge of character, and you have to know, okay, this person's about to flip their lid. I need to run and grab my clothes. And, honestly, my trafficker trained me for exactly what to do in the room. He told me, I could walk you through step by step all the things, but one of the most important things was always either hide my money in my shoe or hide my money in my clothes and put my clothes closer to the door and put my purse on the far side of the room. And that way, when things hit the fan, the buyer would go to the purse, and you could just run out of the room with your clothes and your money still and run and try to evade hotel security. And so, that was honestly almost on a weekly basis, how often the customers are using illicit drugs. They want you to come and party with them. They want to supply you drugs. Yeah, we could go for days.
Yeah, that's insane. And so you said something about it, there's no demographic makeup really, because there's people, addicted to sex in all walks of life. And so I guess, what would you say to people who, you care about this issue and recovering victims and things like that, but don't understand that this is here, that this could be in your church, in your community, that there could be sex buyers, from walks of life that you wouldn't necessarily think.
Oh, definitely. Judges, police officers. There's been so many stings where people in, city council, in local government are being arrested in these stings, and then they're trying to pay their way out of it. It is everywhere. It's across all walks of life. And, it's crazy because a lot of people, you think, okay, pimps, let's go after the pimps. We understand that. Most people don't want to let pimps run free. And, we're starting to see this shift where we're looking at people in prostitution as the victims, right? Whether they have a pimp or not, that they're there out of dire circumstance. And so we should offer them services and a way out instead of a criminal record. But that demand piece is huge. Honestly, the law enforcement stings that I've been on, they have to shut it down because they have so many men coming back to back that they're actually seeing them, the next one being taken out in handcuffs. And so they have to shut down the demand stings. And so, when you look at it, honestly, it's all, I say it's simple economics. It's obviously not that easy. It's humans, but the demand dictates the supply. And if we can reduce the demand to prostitution, if we can make it socially irresponsible and taboo to purchase women, then there will be less women available, right? It doesn't happen overnight, of course. Yeah. But it would. If there's not as many customers buying, people are going to have to do something else. They're going to have to get out of the life.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. And I guess, there's all different kinds of opinions or thoughts on what is the best approach. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like it's not just one thing, it's all the things. And I love how you said it. It's a social, how do you phrase it? Socially irresponsible.
Yeah. I know you know about Epic Project, right? There's some amazing guys out there. Peter, I always get it.
Next week, we're going to have Ty Bowden on, who's going to talk about the project and how they're interacting with buyers on the phone here in the DFW area. So I'm excited to hear about that.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, really, I feel like trafficking is a symptom of a much bigger problem, Lindsay. I mean, the way women are treated, we're seeing, like I mentioned, the Me Too movement, we're seeing all these women. Gretchen Carlson, I had the opportunity to actually sit down and meet with her last week, which is amazing. She obviously was whistleblowing about the sexual harassment at Fox News. She and Julie Roginski, I think I'm saying her Roginski, I don't know. But two women that found their voice and decided to speak out. And, I don't think that we're that different from them. Now, obviously, the exploitation component was different, but it's a symptom of men viewing women as property, that they can talk to us and treat us anyway, and that we're devalued. And so, like, we've got to change that.
And so, there's this social call, which I believe is the community, being the community, us all believing that we're a part of the solution. And then there's the preventative side of things, which is how can we help boys become men who don't believe it's okay to buy sex. And then there's the aftermath of how can buyers be arrested more, risk level versus reward. And we'll, at the end of the month, we're going to talk to Detective Joe Saramuki about the arrest piece. But I'm curious, from your standpoint, I mean, what are some of the solutions to it? And I think people hear, like, okay, if you're saying that there wouldn't be a supply if there wasn't demand, and there wouldn't be this issue, then what are some of the solutions?
I mean, there's a lot of neat things across the country. I think in Chicago, they actually tow the guy's car when he's caught purchasing sex, which that puts a wrinkle in your life. And most likely if you have a wife or, I think it's about 50-50. Research shows that at least half the buyers have wives and children. And so, other ones I've seen in cities where they're posting guys' faces on billboards, or they're, creating websites with buyers' faces. So a little bit of public shame. For me, I don't think shame is a good motivator to change behavior, to be honest, because I think it just makes you hide behavior more. So I think I love, and I know you guys are going to talk to Epic next week, kind of the thoughtful way they have not gone the shame route, and how they're genuine conversations with guys and trying to produce real heart change, that they actually can look at these women as their daughters or their sisters, or as a woman that's been victimized, right? Most likely a woman, possibly a boy as well, but has been victimized their whole life, and now they think this is all they're good for. And here you are purchasing them for, $100, $500. It doesn't matter the amount, for your own sexual pleasure. I think the hope is, there's a lot of demand schools, John schools across the country. So we're starting to see more sex buyer curriculum be implemented, so that way when guys are arrested, that it's not just a fine that they can pay and go home. That this is going to take 6 to 10 weeks out of your life, and you're going to have to look. You're going to hear survivor stories, and that may not change everyone, but it's really hard to hear a survivor story and really be faced with what you're doing and not be changed by it. But in the past, these guys have gotten to operate with impunity. In the state of Texas right now, we have many laws that we need to change. But I was happy to see they moved for prostitution B, which is meant to be for buyers that are caught and arrested. The first time it's a misdemeanor. The second time it's a state jail felony. And that's great. But if you know anything about demand, the likelihood of catching a guy twice is pretty slim. And so it is still great to have on the books, don't get me wrong, but we've got to be trying other avenues as well. We can't arrest our way out of. Yeah,
that's a good point. The likelihood of them being arrested twice, which actually that brings up a thought I have. I'm curious if you have any perspective on this or to share with other people to help them understand. So I know there's stats around high frequency buyers and the idea of how much of demand is offended. I don't know what the right word is by a certain percentage of high frequency buyers, which means those who buy all the time. For those of you who don't know, so what in your experience did you see that kind of play out? And yeah.
Definitely. And those high frequency buyers, they're also the ones that are in, the chat rooms online, like, or websites like Redbook. I'm not sure. I think they got shut down with Fossa Sesta. And so these guys, these high frequency buyers actually share tips with each other. And they also look out for each other like, hey, just heard there's a sting, don't go to this hotel. They look out for each other. They comment on the gratification they got from sexual services from these women, from these people, I should say, from the victims. So the high frequency buyer, I definitely, personally, I definitely had regulars. That was the name of the game. That's what my trafficker taught me to do was, try to make regular clients. That's consistent income, right? Kind of, you look at it like any business, you want repeat customers, you want people to come back. At least you already kind of know them. It's not a cop. Obviously, if they're violent, they would not, you're not going to have a violent customer be a repeat. So you kind of know they're safe, that you're going to have a transaction and be able to leave, alive. So definitely you try to get those guys. And then you have the, random dad that buys his son his first blowjob, or, he loses his virginity to a prostitute at a brothel in Nevada. You have those random buyers as well.
Yeah. No, it's a thing. I was watching something with a similar story of what you just shared, where a dad took his son, when he turned 21, just like you would take him to buy a beer, when he turned 21. Yeah, it's real. So what would you say? If there's anyone, I would say we haven't touched on the link between pornography and demand. And I know that when there's things to be said about this, a lot of times it's like, hey, know that this can lead to this, And so, yeah, speak on that. I guess the link between pornography or what your thoughts are on buyers. How they come to be.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of them are socialized into it. We have the whole locker room talk where we talk, guys, talk negatively about women and view them as, that they don't have value and they just want to get whatever they want from them in the way of their body. And I actually just totally lost my train of thought. What was your question again?
It was buyers. Pornography.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. Your brain is like mine.
It happens. Yes. So pornography, I have a lot of thoughts about that. I definitely think, constantly, watching sex online creates obviously a thirst to act it out. Even if you're self-pleasuring while you're watching it, it's still not the real thing. And you're still going to want to have, sexual encounter with a real human being. And if, a guy's unhappy in his marriage and his wife isn't giving it to him, people that are addicted to pornography are going to seek to satisfy that urge. And so typically a lot of them will turn to people that are being prostituted. Right. And to fill that, because it's just someone they could pay for an encounter and then they can walk away. But what they have to understand is a real human being on the other side of that encounter and what that encounter does, right, to a prostituted person. But also, when you think about pornography, it's nothing but filmed prostitution. It's crazy if you think about it, that we have made it legal and we protected it by free speech even while we outlaw prostitution, just because there's a camera in the room and millions of people can watch it, like it's just honestly, it's crazy. It's unfathomable. But I love Dr. Stephanie Powell at NCOSE, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. I heard her speak on an anti-demand forum for the state of Texas, and she talked about, I think someone posed the question to her that, in the event that you can't actually shut down all pornography, kind of what's the next best thing? And I thought Dr. Powell's answer was really profound because I'd never thought about it. She said that at the bare minimum, if we could at least put some restrictions in place, when you think about movies that are made in Hollywood and what it takes to even have an animal on set, whether it be a dog, a whale, a dolphin, they have to jump through a million hoops, right? By PETA or whatever animal rights organizations there are. But yet pornography, there is no one on set. Women show up to shoot, what they think is going to be some incestual scenario, that is one of the most viewed porn topics. And they show up and they're like, well, we changed our mind. It's going to be a 5-guy gangbang today instead. And, the women, oftentimes we've heard stories now of these porn survivors coming out and they talk about like, no, I was actually really crying and I really wanted to stop. And they basically laugh and keep going and keep shoving the camera, on whatever end they're looking. And, it's just crazy to think that there is no standardization. There's no protection for them, no checks put in place. And so I think that, I don't know, I think when we think about really making a dent, we saw some huge strides made, obviously, recently with Pornhub removing all the user-made content. Like, can I get a high five? That was awesome. Yeah, with Trafficking Hub coming out. And so we need to be looking at how else we can reduce that. And it needs to become, socially unacceptable to think, that you can play out those fantasies on a real human being because you think they're disposable.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, and that was John's story that we heard last week. That was how his story started. And I think that research shows it is more often than not the story.
Honestly, Lindsay, I mean, porn is the ambiance of prostitution. It's constantly playing, all the customers have it going when you show up to the room. So yeah, I think that's very typical.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and a younger generation now that is so exposed to it. And even I'm thinking of the girls that we've worked with so far and how that's played into their victimization and the normalization of things that shouldn't be normal. Because they've grown up, like in this and in sexting and so much of that. I don't know. It's interesting kind of what the research will show in the years to come. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. It predisposes you to, how the kind of treatment, what sex is like. I mean, it shows you takes the worst idea that these guys come up with, these porn producers come up with, and then they shove it on everyone as though it's normal and people consume it. And yeah, it definitely has an effect. Traffickers definitely use porn to groom victims, to show them how they should be acting, to obviously attract more customers. So
yeah, no, it's tough. I'm going to go to a couple questions. So what would say someone, this is super relevant to what we're saying. What would you say to someone who is caught in a porn addiction or sex addiction?
I would say, hey, acceptance is the first step, and that's awesome. I think, I don't go the shame route, as I've mentioned, but there's so many great resources out now for people that, truly want help. And so I would say, hey, if you're ready to, talk about it, like, I know a lot of guys, that they talk about their college years of being addicted, and, they were going 3 or 4 times a day and sneaking to their dorm, and, they thought that their, organ was going to fall off, and they joke about it later. But that leads to a lot of problems for men. It's just not I'm going to say not natural. Like if you're doing it 3 to 4 times a day, every single day,
Yeah.
why do we think that, was it erectile dysfunction is so common, and there's some hypothesis that it's because of porn that these people have, that they're then having, problems in their 40s, when they shouldn't be having problems till their 60s.
Wow. Yeah.
All that to say, go in with grace, ask if they're willing and want help. If they're talking about it, that may be a sign that they're at the beginning stages of change. I would, find some resources that you can hand to them and just help walk them through it, if and when they're ready.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's good. For the everyday, I guess, citizen, they ask, what practical steps can we take to reduce demand?
You got to open the conversation. You have to open the conversation. It's a very uncomfortable one, but it can't just be anti-trafficking organizations that we're the ones on the mountaintop and we're shouting it as loud as we can, but not everyone listens to us. And a lot of times it's the same people that already know, that show up to our events or that, tune online. And so it's really important to have the conversation, with people, your neighbors, right? I mean, you have to make it appropriate, but it's important that we should talk about it. I mean, it's frustrating topics that are so pervasive, like child sexual abuse material, CSAM, how prolific that is online. And people don't want to talk about it because they don't want to think of sexual images of children. But if we don't talk about it, then it's never going to change. And so I think starting those conversations, following anti-trafficking organizations and looking at legislation, you can write your state lawmakers, you can write your local government and ask, hey, what are we doing to combat human trafficking? I actually have an event coming up, and it's kind of in the mid-cities, and it's with all the local government coming up January 22nd at TCC Northeast. And I was really excited because it's Hearst, Euless, Bedford, some smaller cities that maybe aren't hosting events and that aren't talking about it. And so they're willing to start the conversation. So I think that's a couple really practical steps.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, and it can be frustrating too, because in this field, I mean, people don't want to talk about this, like as in the demand side of things. I think it's so uncomfortable because it is everyday America, that it's way easier to have all the talks, about the victimization side of it, which is important. I mean, gosh, hello, but no one's willing to kind of open their ears to fully accept that, like, if you care about this, then you should also at least be aware and be willing to talk about the other side, of this. And that's hard.
Definitely.
I'm looking at questions here. On the, can you address the sensationalism of human trafficking? Ooh, that's a good one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the sensationalism and the systemic racism that's usually not addressed, the sensationalism, when we use images like girls in handcuffs or kept in dog crates or in chains, it really sensationalizes the issue. I've seen magazine articles where it's like a puppet with a, victim on a string. And we all understand what they're trying to convey. Yeah. But the problem is that it sensationalizes what it looks like. And so that means as a victim, if all that I see in the media are those images, well, then I must not be a victim because I wasn't kept in chains. I moved about during the day. My trafficker wasn't always with me. So people need to understand what it actually looks like because, number one, for identification, right, community members to be able to make actionable tips to the human trafficking hotline. Also for victims themselves and law enforcement. If we only have sympathy for the very rare victim that is actually kept in chains, then we're missing, 99.99% of human trafficking that's taking place right under our noses. The victims are walking around. They're going into CVS. They're going into the grocery store, right? They're living life, and so we need to actually represent what it actually looks like. And the other thing I want to say is, um, I get really frustrated with organizations that only post pictures or, use stock images of white women as victims. We have a real problem with seeing Black and brown girls as victims in this country, and I'm just fed up. I know, there's so many people that attack this issue head on, but we need to represent what it actually looks like. And when you look at the statistics, its majority is Black and brown girls that are being bought and sold, as well as boys, right? We know. And so it's very important that we represent that boys are victims too, because if we don't see it in imagery and media, then we don't think about that person as a victim when we walk by them on the street. We look at them like, oh, somehow they're choosing it. They must like it.
And that boy is not going to believe he's a victim.
Exactly.
Either.
Totally.
No, good point. Well, and I guess I just think I know our team here all has a caseload of girls that they're serving and in relationship with and helping, and it can be so frustrating to us on the ground, doing this work when we see the stories that'll hit the news, and then it's like, that's not our experience, and while every experience is different, it's okay. But if the sensationalist or the sensationalized stories are the ones that the media is choosing to take, we're like, man, 95% of the youth we serve don't have those stories. They're the foster kid in your neighborhood. They're the runaway downtown on, at the bus stop. Like they're somewhat everyday kids, but a lot of times troubled youth who no one's going to turn blind, eye about. But then the stories hit the news, and I think it's really hard. Like I feel that all the time. And I know someone mentioned one of the cases is the Zephaniah case that hit the news, and people have been asking us a lot about it. And since we work in Dallas County, we have kind of stayed a little bit out of on all of that, because we don't talk about any of the youth that we serve or don't serve. And since she is minor, we've kind of kept at it. But I know you've been really active lately in that. And so I know someone just asked something about it. What about Stephanie Trevino's a great case on why laws need to change? What would you want to say about that?
Yeah, that is a great point. I also just wanted to highlight real quick. I think people have this image of it's like this really good kid that all of a sudden just gets trafficked. And it's like, no, like you said, most often, right, we come from poverty, homelessness, the foster care system, but also, with a little bit of juvenile delinquent behavior. When we see those kids that are sounding alarm bells by cutting class, by maybe stealing things, for me, before I ever got trafficked, I'd already been arrested 2 times. I came from a good family, but I was assaulted, and then I started acting out with my behavior. I started using drugs to cope with the pain. I wanted to be numb. And then I started cutting class, right? That just put me around a really bad crowd of people. And it just went downhill from there. And so we have to understand, when we see cases like that, where there is some criminality, we all know as the professionals, we know that's what we should expect, right? Especially once you start being trafficked, you're going to be caught up in a variety of crimes. And it may look like you're actually the guilty party. If people don't look behind what they see on the surface and search for what is causing that child to do that. And oftentimes it is a trafficker behind them. And so, yeah, Zeffie's case highlights a lot of broken points in the system. I can't speak too much about details, but I think there's many points of interception that would have helped Zephaniah instead of it only making it worse. And I think in the state of Texas, there's only 31 states. Dr. Vanessa Boucher informed me the other day, there's only 31 states right now that have an affirmative defense of human trafficking. And so what that means when we see cases like Mia Santoro and Zephaniah Trevino, and there's many others that are in the system, their parents just don't have the money for good attorneys, and they're not getting Kim Kardashian and Jamie Lee Curtis to shout them out on social media. But what that means is when these victims are caught up in crimes, if there is no human trafficking affirmative defense, then like Mia's case, the prosecutor actually prevented any mitigating evidence to be produced at trial that she was being trafficked. And so it didn't matter. She was at the scene of a murder, and because of our party's law, then she was charged with murder. And so we're seeing a very similar fact pattern in Zephaniah's case. And so that is one of the things. That's why you've seen the social outcry to call on DA John Crusoe to look at the trafficking evidence, to look behind the behavior that he saw that day and understand why, how Zephaniah even got there.
And what is it called? What do the 31 states have or don't have?
It's called an affirmative defense. And so in the state of Texas, there was a case that just came down. Elizabeth Henneke, actually, from Lone Star Justice Alliance, educated me on. And what the Texas Criminal Court of Appeals, basically the current case law is that it doesn't matter, and this goes for domestic violence as well. And so we don't have it for human trafficking or domestic violence or sexual assault, right? Any of those crimes. So it means it doesn't matter if someone held a gun to your head 6 times before. If he wasn't holding a gun to your head in that moment, then you weren't in duress. And that just flies in the face, as you know, Lindsay, of everything we understand about the neurobiology of what's actually happening in abused people's brains. And we know very much that threat is real. When someone beats you bloody or when someone threatens to kill your family, it doesn't take much for you to understand that threat is very real. And so oftentimes you will go along with whatever they say to prevent violence.
Yeah. No, that's real. And like you said, it happens so many times. And I don't have the number off the top of my head right now, but so many youth that we have who have juvenile justice charges, real charges. Actually, one who's even we have someone else that we're serving with a really intense charge that she could go away for life, and she's underage, and people don't know because they're either underage case or like you said, their family doesn't have enough money for an attorney, and so it's hard because we want to speak out about this, but we can't always, but this is an opportunity, obviously, that has gotten in the news and hopefully wakens people up. No, it's good.
Yeah. And I think I saw a comment from Tony McKinley. Hey, Tony. She said they used it all against her. And yeah, that is correct. So once they were able to produce some evidence, I think, and Tony, thanks for jumping in. The judge in that case, I think, is actually on record saying, not in these specific words, but essentially saying, yeah, I know you were trafficked, but I think you liked it, right? Talking about a teenager, a very young teenager that had been trafficked from a young age. And for anyone to say that is just absolutely ridiculous. Like, we have got to train. I mean, we've done so much training, Lindsay, and I know we feel like we're saying the same thing, but there's so many people that have no clue, right? Judges and jury and DAs that don't really understand this issue from a trauma-informed perspective.
Oh, it's so true. It's so true. Lots of questions here. I'm trying to see what's it. Someone's getting random requests on Facebook from good-looking men, which you never accept, but someone told me this is a way for traffickers to expand their networks. What would you say?
It is. Yeah, I know many victims, as I'm sure you do, Lindsay, working with how many youth you guys work with, that traffickers, they will go right online, start to build a relationship. A lot of times, I don't think every time you get that message, it's not a trafficker. I actually worked with Joe Scaramucci. I got one of those requests on Instagram, and we looked into the guy, and it was just a scam. It was like a financial scam. Essentially, you'll see the sugar baby, right? The sugar daddy ones where they'll, hey, do you want to make $500 a week? And unfortunately, when it is actually a trafficker, and our kids see an opportunity, if we haven't educated them on things that sound too good to be true, probably are, and if we don't have those open, honest conversations with them, then they could get caught up in that. And definitely there's, case after case, especially now that really street prostitution, it's still going on, and was seeing FOSTA SESTA pass, a lot of websites were shut down. And so it's really moved just right out in the open on social media. So definitely it could be an exploiter. You could definitely look at the profile and probably tell. Usually they're not that very secret about it, but it also could just be a financial scam or something.
Yeah, don't overgeneralize all those things. I think that's when sometimes we'll get these viral messages. People are like, beware, blah, 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 or beware, blah, blah, blah. Like, look, traffickers use as many ploys in the book as there are pages. I mean, there's so many different ways. So yeah, I would say definitely don't overgeneralize all of those, but I think it's helpful to be safe. What is problematic about calling sex work work? That's a good one.
Honestly, because it's neither, right? It's not consensual sex. You know, when you introduce an influencer as powerful as money to the table, really consent goes out the window, because that means at the end of the day, I'm only having sex with you because you're paying me money. And, you know, when it comes down to it, I can't just take clients I want to see, right? I mean, if I don't have clients I want to see in a month, if my regulars aren't coming around, I'm having to take some other people, right? So at some point you begin having sex with people that you would never have sex with, you know, and it's to pay your bills. It's to put food in your kids' mouths. It's, you know, to go to college, right? Whatever it may be. So I don't agree that it's sex, number one. I think sex is something beautiful that should be enjoyed between two consensual adults. And it's also not work, right? It's exploitation, you know, as I've talked about earlier with the legal system. So even when it is legalized, it's horrific. You know, the House in Nevada would take 50% off of our money off the top, and then they would charge room and board and doctor fees and everything else out of the 50% that you did get to keep, which in my case, I got none. You know, my one pimp took 50%, the other pimp took the other. And so, you know, like we've kind of touched on lightly, when you look at research of prostituted people, whether they're by force or circumstance, it doesn't matter. You know, they come from horrific backgrounds. They've typically been sexually abused as children. You know, I think this happy hooker myth, right, that people want to have, and that it's somehow they feel like it's empowering and it's glamorous. And, you know, when you look at the very small percentage of women that are in prostitution that are actually there, they actually have choices, and they're there because they want to be. It's a very slim minority, and it's usually white women from advantaged backgrounds. And I know we all know that we're not going to make a law, right? We're not going to validate sex work for that slim minority of white women. Most often, when the vast majority, right, the demand that being able to sell sex creates, the vast majority is Black and brown girls, right? People that come from these backgrounds we've talked about. And so we cannot continue making laws in this country to benefit this slim minority of affluent people that actually have choices, because most often people that find themselves in prostitution aren't there by choice. You know, I had the opportunity, Lindsay, to debate a sex worker, a pro-sex worker at TCU a couple years ago. I think you were there, weren't you?
I remember hearing it.
Okay. And this woman, Bella Robinson, she's very public, otherwise I would not share her name. There's a YouTube video of it actually online. And Bella Robinson is from Rhode Island. She runs an organization called Coyote, which stands for Call Off Your Old Tired Ethics. And Bella has been in sex work at that point about 20 years. And 10 of those years, she was addicted to crack cocaine. And at this point in her life, you know, as of a couple years ago, she had finally figured out how to make sex work safe, she told me in this debate. And that was by only seeing repeat clients and only working during the daytime. So I didn't even have to argue, right? If this is safe and you want to advocate for it for everyone, then why can you only work in the daytime, and why can you only see repeat clients? That's because prostitution is inherently violent. You cannot legalize the violence out of prostitution. And so it sets up this power dynamic, this power differential, you know, that men can purchase women. And so, you know, after watching the Washington, D.C. City Council debates, when they were talking about going full decrim in Washington, D.C., and the people that stood up in support of it were mostly LGBTQ identifying individuals. And it honestly broke my heart, because it's like here they and groups that support them are advocating for sex work to be an option for them, when sex work is the opposite of empowerment, right? It's oppression. Why aren't we advocating for fair treatment in the workplace? Why aren't we advocating for truly empowering, right, ways that they can actually be empowered versus the most baseless form of exploitation that has been around forever? Why are we advocating for them to work in a violent profession, right? Mm-hmm. If we're going to call it a profession. So those are some of my thoughts.
I think it's so helpful even for sex buyers to hear these things, because I think that, not to give any of them an excuse, but I think there's some of them that don't know, that don't fully understand what they're driving. And to hear, I know a lot of John's schools will have survivor leaders come in and share, just about like, hey, you may or may not have known this, but when you purchased sex last week, here's what you did. Like here's what you fed into or paid into on the larger scheme that you should know. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I don't know.
It's
good. They look at it like it's just a transaction. They're paying this girl and a lot of times buyers will joke about it. Like, I pay him to not talk. I pay him to leave. That's why they purchase prostitutes and prostituted people. And man, like, wow, just denying your humanity. Like, you pay them to leave. That's a human being that is being paid to leave from one person to the next. Like, people have no idea what that life is like.
Man, it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. I think that the humanity of it all is really, to me, the overarching narrative. No matter where you are in the equation, that we are all humans deserving of dignity, and that we all have a story. And you're just my favorite. Thank you for sharing today. Yeah. I don't know. I really love you. I love getting to watch all the cool things that happen through your life, and people getting to hear little glimpses of just like the brilliant brain that you have is just amazing. I'm like, tell me what you think of this. Tell me what you think about this. Tell me what you think of this. No, but yeah, you're incredible. But any last words? One you want to know?
No, thank you for, highlighting this conversation, Lindsay. I love Traffic 911. You're always one of my first calls over the last 5-6 years. Like, hey, do you know who did this? Or, hey, this victim needs this. So I love what you guys are doing. And, thank you for your partnership. We need more and more amazing allies that truly get this issue and that lift and elevate survivors' voices to be heard.
Wow. Love it. Love it. All right. Well, we will end. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And thank you, Bekah. Love you big.
Yeah, I love you too. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.